Welcome everyone to AE911Truth Webinars. My name is Richard Gage, AIA. I'm a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. We are delighted to have you join us today, and I'm broadcasting from the great state of California in the Berkeley area, where we are situated and ready to let all professionals and all government officials and all media representatives and everyone throughout this country know what really happened at the World Trade Center on 9/11. And I can't do this by myself. I'm joined by Andy Steele, our operations coordinator. How are you, Andy?
I'm doing really good, Richard. Very happy to be here and helping you get this information to the people that need to hear it. I just want to remind everybody, like I always do, that the picture in the videos default to a low resolution. We can't do anything about that, but if you want to boost the resolution, just click the gearbox beneath the screen, select 720 HD resolution. That'll bring the pictures to you in clear, crisp manner, and that's the way you want to see them to see this information. And we will be taking questions today too, like always, related to the material that Richard is covering in this webinar. If there's questions about other aspects of this evidence that'll be covered in later webinars, you can submit those then too. But you can submit those questions by just typing them into the question box beneath the screen here, and we will be taking them, like I said. So that's it. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks so much, Andy. And yes, indeed, we have lots to cover. This is a 4-week seminar, 4-week webinar. And in these 4 weeks, we cover the destruction of World Trade Center 7 and the explosive destruction of the Twin Towers in weeks 3 and 4. We'll have an overview today of Building 7. And then next week, we'll go into more depth. What we want to share with you today is that we use a scientific method. We'll talk about that. We're going to be looking at the evidence of explosives and incendiaries at the World Trade Center Building 7. Normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper. We'll be looking at why and how indeed they operate on materials in these steel frame high rises. Pyroclastic flows, we'll be looking at extreme heat from the World Trade Center Building 7, the 3rd skyscraper. Most people don't even know about it. Most architects and engineers are unfamiliar with the 3rd skyscraper that collapsed on 9/11. We'll be looking at the evidence of foreknowledge today, and what do the experts say? All that's coming up, but I want you to know a little bit about who I am. I have had a 29-year career as an architect. I've worked on these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums, for instance, among the many different types of projects I've worked on. These are in the San Francisco Bay Area at this high school, for which I also had the construction administration responsibilities for this $125 million project near San Francisco. And more recently, though, I've worked on the $400 million project here in construction documents and construction administration for this project with 6 blocks of retail and mid-rise office structure and parking structure, altogether about 1,200 tons of fireproofed steel framing. And now I'm devoting all of my time to sharing with you the incendiary evidence, along with 2,500 architects and engineers that I represent, now 2,700, who are calling for a new investigation, who have placed their reputations on the line. You're going to find out why today. And we want to encourage you to join them, because we have 20,000 others who have signed our petition calling for a new unimpeachable investigation that includes all the evidence that you're going to see this month, week by week, as we travel through the litany of evidence ignored by NIST. It can be found on our website, AE911Truth.org, where you can see all kinds of very interesting information, videos, the evidence, frequently asked questions. You can sign our petition. You can sign up for our free monthly email newsletter, and much more. But we're talking about 9/11 during the next hour, and we're very concerned. Why? Well, people say, this is 15 years old. This is history. Why are you even going there? Well, 9/11 spawned a whole litany of policies and invasions. And while we don't go into the details of that, we think if there's any question about 9/11, such as the evidence you're going to be seeing today, which directly contradicts the NIST report, which is the official government version of what happened on 9/11, then given everything that has happened since 9/11 as a result of 9/11, primarily the destruction at the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers, if there's any question about what happened there, which gave rise to all of this, invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq, a $4.5 trillion global war on terror, the legislative and executive order loss of our civil liberties, which our forefathers fought for, and all the rest of this set of disastrous consequences, then we ought to be looking at it. And when we do, we use the scientific method. We've had it in the West for 100 years or so. It helps us winnow error from truth, fact from fiction. It helps us to be objective with our analysis. We have a question. How did the towers come down? Well, we lay out all of the hypotheses in order after making some background research. How have other towers come down? These hypotheses are not subjectively excluded from our analysis. We take all the rational hypotheses, we lay them out, we look at them objectively, and we test them with experiments after making predictions. If this is true, maybe this would be true. Oh, let's test that. We analyze the results of all of this work, of course, and if the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner so all can build on the body of our work, knowing that our work is accurate. It's peer-reviewed. We're not hiding the input data, for instance, for our computers. The analysis of World Trade Center 7, which NIST will not release to the architects and engineers who are tasked with ensuring the public safety, even though they will not release this, claiming that it would jeopardize public safety. So that's an example of non-transparency. If the hypothesis is not corroborated, we report the results. We go back and we find a hypothesis that stands a better chance against the data. That's what we do until we get to a point where we can report those results, and they're conclusively and in a peer-reviewed fashion, which NIST also did not accomplish, so that we know we're proceeding based on fact, not a political agenda, for instance, which so often dominates science these days. So we gather data. That's what we're going to start with. How have other high-rises been brought down? Well, fires never brought down a high-rise, but say in a wood frame building, it's an organic process. It burns through the area in pretty quickly in wood frame buildings. In steel frame buildings, when there's an office fire, it'll burn through in about 20 minutes, looking for fresh new fuel sources, having burned out the area behind. And so when a building comes down, a wood frame building, it'll come down organically, asymmetrically, in stops and starts. It doesn't crash straight down through the path of greatest resistance. The intact, cold, hard structure below there's going to meet some resistance. And we'll be talking more about that. But say, what history do we have of high-rise fires? Well, there's been 100 very large, hot, and long-lasting fires in these buildings. This one in Los Angeles, over 3.5 hours over 5 floors, didn't come down. This one in Philadelphia, 18 hours, it burned over 8 floors, didn't come down. This one, Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors, didn't come down. None of them have come down. Well, there have been some mid-rise buildings that have come down, and due to natural causes, in this case earthquakes, which has brought the building over, but generally over, yes, because it doesn't fall straight down through the path of greatest resistance. But the building is mangled, certainly, but its structural elements are not severed one from another. Its concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. And you'll see what I mean shortly about that. But this is how we would expect an organic collapse to proceed. These buildings exploded. We have thick, billowing, enormous pyroclastic-like clouds created by the intense heat from the chemical reactions. We have cauliflower-shaped plumes that are unfolding rapidly because of those chemical reactions and that massive heat. We have a thick, defined edge about it because the intense solids are suspended in the air, and it's expanding more rapidly than it can diffuse, such as the dust you see in normal controlled demolitions, which you're going to see in a minute. We have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. If you have these features, you know you have explosions. So you can get a sense of where we're heading here. Comparing explosions to the destruction of explosions to the destruction of fire. Well, explosions can be harnessed quite effectively, creating thousands of them, placing them in the columns and beams in controlled demolitions, which have happened hundreds of times throughout the world. There's a handful of companies who can accomplish this. They do it by engineering carefully located cutter charges throughout the columns and beams in the building, and then setting them off in a very precise order, which brings the building down in the manner in which they want. There are some key features of controlled demolitions. What are they? Well, we have a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure. We have a straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint, because demolition waves remove that column support. This results in a free fall acceleration straight down through the path of what was the greatest resistance, and a total dismemberment of the steel structure, broken up, ready for loading and shipment. Minimal damage to adjacent structures. Number 7, sounds of explosions heard by witnesses, flashes of light, sometimes and usually seen by them. Enormous clouds of pulverized concrete, and isolated explosive ejections, sometimes called squibs. And finally, of course, chemical evidence of the cutter charges left behind in the debris. If you have these 10 key characteristic features of controlled demolition, you know you have direct evidence of explosive destruction. And guess what? Fire can't create any one of these, we believe, let alone all 10 of them. So this is very, very important evidence to scientifically analyze with respect to buildings which we're trying to figure out were destroyed by fire or controlled demolition. It can be very helpful to have additional circumstantial and corroborative evidence, such as the government documentation of a controlled demolition. It takes months of planning. So we have often government information from the government, and you have to apply for permits. You can't just bring down a building, especially in the middle of Manhattan, without approval, legally anyway. Experts agree this is a controlled demolition. At least those experts who are unbiased, who don't have, for instance, $100,000 contracts with the federal government to take down buildings. But say outside of this country, for instance, we'd be looking for some experts. Foreknowledge. Yeah, these are taken down, planned months in advance. So often we have, indeed, the information that comes from various sources. With video documentation, all of this is, of course, proof of controlled demolition, and that's what we're going to be looking at now. World Trade Center Building 7. Did you know about it? Most people do not. More people have become aware in the last 10 years as a result of the work of the 9/11 Truth movement, getting the information out there, such as our video narrated by Ed Asner, Solving the Mystery of World Trade Center 7, a 15-minute video which convinces any open-minded person, and there are some that are not, but most all people, even seeing that 15-minute version, will realize that this building, half the height of the Twin Towers, was brought down by controlled demolition. That's what we're going to be looking at today, the evidence of this building. So it's 47 stories tall. Now, this would easily be the tallest building in most of our states. It wasn't hit by an airplane. So what happened to it? How did it come down? How did we not hear about this in a massive way in the professional community? It's the worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers, which we have jet fuel and planes, and we'll be getting to that in weeks 3 and 4, the end of August, middle of August. So here's this building about a football field in length away from the North Tower, and it did get some damage to it when the towers came down. But NIST says, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, they say in their final report, which came out 7 years later after 9/11, they were juggling this hot potato. They couldn't get a handle on it. Shyam Sundar, its project leader, said. But it's still standing. And they say that the damage was not a significant factor in the building's collapse. Well, what was? We'll come to that. Well, we're going to see if there's any evidence for the explosive demolition of this building by comparing its features to the features of a controlled demolition. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure? Well, let's take a listen to Daryl, a medical student, witness on site that day.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The box photos of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a cloud of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that. And
wow. So a sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, windows busting out, and then the building coming down. That's important information. But let's see it ourselves with our own eyes as we listen to Dan Rather narrate what for many of us may be our first view of this building's collapse.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by wall-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Well, Dan, this is very helpful information. Dan's using his intuition to describe what he's seen. I mean, we've all seen the old hotels in Las Vegas, and indeed, they come down smoothly. It's kind of hypnotic to actually watch this. And so he's going, my God, it looks like, but we never heard those words from him before. I mean, since 9/11. And most of us have never seen this building on TV after 9/11 on the news. This should have been the most studied building failure in history. It is the third worst structural failure in modern history. And yet most architects and engineers know nothing about it. It wasn't played on TV, with maybe 3 or 4 exceptions, since 9/11. Well, does it have a straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint? Let's take a look from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. We'll go and get into the footprint part later, but notice the screen wall and main penthouse dropping a half a second prior to the overall global collapse. This is, of course, directly indicative that the support structure underneath that middle core section has been compromised, allowing it to fall a half a second. Thus, the initiation of collapse from NIST, which we will be looking at in detail next week, cannot possibly be true. This is direct evidence that the core structure is removed first, which contradicts the official theory, which is in direct support of the hypothesis of controlled demolition. But this wasn't analyzed as such. Well, I'm not quite convinced yet. Let's put building 7 on the left and a known controlled demolition, in fact, several of them, on the right, and see if there's any similarity. Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and especially since fire, the official cause, as we'll see, of this building's collapse, according to NIST, has never brought down a skyscraper. So controlled demolition should have obviously been the first hypothesis that NIST examined, but they did not seriously examine it. They only answered questions later, saying it couldn't have been a controlled demolition. It didn't start at the bottom. It couldn't have been a controlled demolition because we would have heard loud blasts heard mile away. It couldn't have been a controlled demolition because people would have been seen bringing materials into the building. Well, all of those are addressed by us and those who research this building's collapse, and we'll get to that. So what did NIST do? They focused all of their attention on these fires as the cause of this building's collapse. And these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of. And these fires are said to have brought this building symmetrically, straight down into its footprint in the manner that you just saw. You can see why we have 2,700 architects and engineers saying, crying foul. Well, NIST also ruled out diesel fuel fires, even though this was an initial suspicion by many, because those diesel fuel fires would have been on this floor with all these louvers where all the generators were, the 5th floor. And yet there's no smoke coming out of these fires. And so it is ruled out. And so we're looking at the 12th and the 11th and 12th floor here, where I guess the worst fires were. We'll come back and find out what happened to those fires. Well, how do we bring a building straight down uniformly into its own footprint? We have to remove all of the columns virtually at once. There's over 80 columns in this building. 24 core columns in the core, which we saw from the videos must have been taken out first, since the penthouse comes down. Well, the east penthouse comes down about 6 seconds earlier. So something happened in this area of column 79. We'll get to that. In fact, we'll get to that very, very carefully next week as we dive into the details of the initiation of collapse from NIST. But all the rest of these columns must have been taken out a half a second prior to the perimeter. That's how you get a building to fall symmetrically. If any of those columns fall out of order, like by more than a second, then this building begins to tip over. And there are some horrid examples of controlled demolitions where if it's not precise, they fall over, not straight down. It is a precise science. The question is, does fire have that level of precision? How fast is a building coming down? Well, you can see the building gaining downward momentum second by second. It's accelerating. It's getting faster and faster, straight down through the path of what was the greatest resistance, all those columns that you just saw. It fits the free fall curve exactly. In fact, NIST was forced to admit this after originally denying that it came down at free fall. It's as if 8 stories of this building were removed all at once, allowing the building to come down as fast as a bowling ball falling off the sky. Why 8 stories? Because 100 feet or 2¼ seconds, which is a third of this building's fall, is happening at direct free fall. This is measured by physicist David Chandler, and we'll take a look at that next week, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. Broken up like a house of cards, one column from another, one beam from a column. Remember, buildings that fall naturally due to unplanned events, their structure is not severed from itself in pieces. It's not shattered. The concrete is not pulverized, and we'll see examples of that soon. Do we have witnesses that heard sounds of explosions, though? Well, here's Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds, you heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
This is important evidence. Who else is talking about explosions? Well, let's listen to WB11.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you could just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
A big flash? Well, what about the gentleman, Barry Jennings, who was working on the 23rd floor of the Office of Emergency Management that morning, not realizing that the building had been evacuated after the planes hit the Twin Towers, but before they came down, he and the attorney for Mayor Giuliani, Michael Hess, walked up into this building and experienced this.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs, witnesses of explosions. Why did none of these credible witnesses get interviewed and included in the final reports in this objective analysis by NIST who was tasked by Congress to explain what happened in this building. How did it come down? Explosions like this heard in the afternoon of 9/11.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
The afternoon of 9/11. Remember, Building 7 comes down at 5:20 in the afternoon. And these guys are right near it. Well, not one of these witnesses of explosions appear in any of the final reports of any of the three towers. And in week three, we'll be looking very specifically at a lot more witnesses. So, do we have enormous pyroclastic clouds of pulverized concrete? Well, we'll focus on the pyroclastic part, which is heat, massive heat, which the NFPA 921, the Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigation, produced by the National Fire Protection Association for all of our fire investigation and fire protection engineers. They have some very specific guidelines which are used internationally. They say, look for large volumes of gas and a large amount of heat released in chemical explosions caused by rapidly expanding plumes of hot gases. And of course, we've been looking at these plumes. Here they are here, racing 35 miles an hour away from Building 7 in every direction. Much more heat in these cauliflower-shaped, rapidly expanding heat-induced plumes than you saw in the few small scattered fires in this building. So what's responsible for this massive release of heat? We'll take a look at that next week, more specifically. But we believe that this is direct evidence of explosive destruction so far, these first 8 features, and we'll look more at features 9 and 10 with extreme heat evidence next week. But so far, this is direct evidence of explosive destruction and fire. The official cause of this building's collapse can't explain any of these, we think, let alone all of them. Fires like World Trade Center 5, right next to Building 7, completely engulfed in fire. If any of these World Trade Center buildings were to collapse due to fire, would you not expect this to be the first one? Did it? No. No collapse. Mid-rise, high-rise office buildings have never collapsed due to fire. Why? They're fireproofed. They have very, very thick layer of cementitious fireproofing on their structural members. And we'll be looking at next week at fire tests on buildings that don't even have cementitious fireproofing on their structural members, and yet still they do not collapse, even when we produce 2,000-degree fires, like in the largest fire test in the world done in 1995 in the United Kingdom. We'll look at that next week. But take a look at the Mandarin Hotel in 2009 in Beijing, completely burned, top to bottom, completely engulfed, this high rise. Did it come down? 4 on the left, after on the right, slightly toasted around the edges, ready to go back into use. Got remodeled. But these small scattered fires in World Trade Center 7 brought this building down in 6.5 seconds. Yes, that's how fast this building came down. You can measure it yourself. Into a pile like a house of cards for the first time ever. Blamed on normal office fires. Well, let's look at the reports that came from official sources. FEMA, the first report, which evolved out of the volunteers from the American Society of Civil Engineers, They doubt their own fire-based theory. The specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. Wait a minute, you spent $600,000 on this report and you don't know how the building came down. Our best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. Well, fire was their best hypothesis. Wow, what do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You go back and find another hypothesis that has a better probability of occurrence. But they didn't have the funding to do that. But they recommended that further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, though, for those hoping to resolve the issue, the steel from World Trade Center 7 was carted away beginning just 2 weeks after 9/11 to barges. What happened to those barges? They were shipped to China for recycling. This happened at a rate of 400 trucks per day, shipping this material out of the site. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene. Oh, but this was declared an act of war, so they weren't bound by the protection of criminal evidence procedures and laws that normally are in effect. So you can see why we need a new investigation here. In fact, the editor himself of the Fire Engineering magazine, the communication vehicle for fire protection engineers in this country, he says, Bill Manning, crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But of course, it did not. It was in the hands of political forces, not technical investigators. Well, what do these experts say? Here's an expert outside the US, not bound by his allegiance to his contract providers, i.e. the federal government, of which all of the controlled demolition experts in the United States get most of their work. 27-year controlled demolition expert Danny Jawenko. He's shown a laptop without being told where this controlled demolition of Building 7 came from, or that it was Building 7, or that it was part of 9/11. This is, I think, a year later or two. He says, well, it starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. It's professional work, without a doubt. And then they said, well, this happened on 9/11. And he scratches his head. And this is really? Yeah, they said, yeah, this is Building 7. It came down like this in the afternoon of 9/11. He says, are you sure? And yeah, see, it's right here. Well, they must have worked very fast. He's just trying to rationalize how controlled demolition experts could have gotten into a building in the afternoon and set explosives while the building's on fire. Of course, that's not going to happen. But he's trying to make sense out of it. It doesn't make sense unless the building was pre-planned to come down on 9/11. Well, what's their foreknowledge of that if that's the case? Well, here's these construction workers seen on CNN camera, hearing an explosion over their backs, looking back at Building 7, and then looking straight into the camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building. It's coming down.
Building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys.
We are walking back. It's a building about to blow up. The flame, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Flame and debris coming down. How do they know the building is about to blow up? There was a few small scattered fires in it. They've never blown up buildings, fires. They've never brought a high-rise building down. Well, let's listen to Kevin McPadden, because before he testified, immediately before he testified about those explosions you heard earlier in this presentation, he had this to say, because he was listening to a radio held in the hands of a gentleman who was a Red Cross worker. And this is what he heard on the radio.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What is going on? We're trying to piece together something that very clearly contradicts what we've been told about this building. And here's another piece of the puzzle. The announcement of the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it ever happened. The announcement of the collapse, which is completely unprecedented by fires, a building coming down. And they even have the reason. They say due to structural weakening when the Twin Towers went down. Well, that's not even the official story. So what happened? They apologized for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. Does this make them psychic? What is really going on here? Well, CNN announced the collapse of this building even earlier that morning. Let's listen.
In New York, Alan Dodds Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan.
Alan, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon.
So 15 minutes after the second Twin Tower went down, they're announcing the collapse of a 50-story building, which did not happen. So they successfully predicted the collapse, but 7 hours earlier. How does that happen? Well, had this building, and there was no other building that collapsed, much less a 50-story building. They're clearly referring to Building 7. There were buildings that were damaged by beams, but none of them collapsed. So had this building come down 15 minutes earlier, when it is said here to have come down 15 minutes after the Twin Towers, we wouldn't even see the videos, about 11 of them, because it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud released when the Twin Towers went down. So many researchers suggest or speculate that this building was supposed to have gone down at that time and that there was some sort of glitch. And that's why they're all putting out this information that it's going to come down. It's going to come down. Get away, back away. It's got structural damage. It's going to come down. Well, there's no evidence for structural damage that could bring this building down. And even NIST says it wasn't the structural damage that brought it down. It was fires. So that's speculation. But what's not is the rest of this evidence, which we believe suggests the hypothesis is corroborated of explosive destruction, particularly with the 8 key characteristic features of controlled demolition, which we've looked at today. And next week, we'll be looking at more. But this, even so far, this is direct evidence of explosive destruction, and fire can't really bring down, it can't be responsible for any of these, we believe. With additional corroborative circumstantial evidence in the green column here, we believe this is proof of controlled demolition beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you are so inclined at this point to agree with us to the point of calling for a new investigation, then we would like to join you. We would like you to join us in realizing, first of all, that this is a very highly secure building with the CIA, the Secret Service, the IRS, the Department of Defense, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, the bunker designed to manage the city in the event of a catastrophic emergency like this. The Securities and Exchange Commission on the 13th floor, where the worst fires were, which lost thousands of cases related to files related to hundreds of cases that it was actively pursuing against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom. So we certainly want an investigation of those fires on that floor. And of course, we're curious too. We're not criminal investigators, but we certainly have a mind that allows itself to think, who could have gained access to this building to set these explosives? Was this Al-Qaeda? Could Al-Qaeda have gotten access to this extremely highly secure building, one of the most highly secure outside the Pentagon and the Twin Towers? We want an investigation of the security company, of course, under whose noses would have had to have been brought all of this material to bring this building down. And a time, of course, to take months, we imagine, of planning and execution and placement of explosives and incendiaries in this case, as we'll see next week. So yes, we want an investigation, of course. We're not criminal investigators, as I mentioned, though. So our job is to educate the public, the building professionals, the elected representatives, and government officials until there's enough force applied at higher levels of government to force this investigation. It's a step-by-step process, and we're asking you to start and join us by signing the petition, becoming a member of AE911Truth also, if you can. We have members at $2.50 a month, 2,000, and that keeps us going. But we need greater help than that. If you can, $10 a month or more also can be very helpful. Large donations can be very, very, very helpful as we go around the country, for instance, to the American Institute of Architects state conventions, where we can have a booth and educate hundreds of architects, and the national convention, where we can educate thousands of them, as we have done every year. This takes funding. We're not rich. We don't get grants from the federal government or defense contractors or any other corporations. And you can volunteer with us too. In fact, Andy's here and he's got some ideas of exactly what you can do to volunteer.
Absolutely. I'm the volunteer coordinator here at AE, and if you are moved by this evidence, you're ready to roll up your sleeves and do something to get the word out about everything that you've seen here, reach out to professional organizations, people in government, people that need to hear about this, then we want you. All you got to do is the first step is go to AE911Truth.org and click the What You Can Do tab at the very top. There you'll be given the option to volunteer. It's a very quick form box you just fill out with your contact information, and we will get in touch with you and get you on one of these important projects. So please do that if you're so inclined, because we need all the help we can get. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Andy. And there's more. You can, from your own computer, write the TV, radio, newspaper locally. Tell them about 2,700 architects and engineers. Tell them about this evidence. Send them the links to the videos that we're recommending, that you'll see on our website, that I'm going to show you a trailer of in a minute. Tell everyone you know. Send the AE911Truth.org link to every architect and engineer you can find. Screen the DVDs. Show your colleagues. Don't be afraid to talk about this. If you have come into contact with this information, then you can imagine that there are others who also deserve to hear it from you, because we can't reach everybody, but you can. You being hundreds of thousands of people who care enough about your country and knowing the truth that you've been lied to on such a monumental scale in a crime that is easily the crime of the century. You can see how much support it's going to take to shift the awareness to conscious awareness of the truth about what brought these towers down, which will pull out the rug from all of the disastrous consequences that we looked at earlier today of what happened since 9/11 to our country and what's going to happen. I mean, is this just an isolated situation? No, this is one and an example of several manipulations, lies that we are concerned about. And so this is the one we're focusing on because it is so easily understood by so many. And it begins to raise awareness to other things that are going on in our country that we all need to know about. So share the resources, realize and support the effort. Realize that there's an effort that we want you to support today for our own computer analysis, open architecture, open input data, peer reviewed, unlike the NIST report. A $300,000 project that we've engaged Leroy Halsey, top forensic structural engineer, and at the University of Alaska. He is halfway through his 2-year analysis. This takes all of us to support. And you can learn more about it at WTC7evaluation.org. And know that we have a 55-page booklet which critiques the NIST report and provides the evidence for explosive demolition, which they've ignored. And you can get this report for free. How? Click below on our website. Get Beyond Misinformation. And if you're not there, you can just go to our website and click on sign up for the free newsletter. And you'll get the latest evidence that we've been able to put together in various forms, including the brochure. We have a newspaper, DVDs, this booklet, and a new brochure now. It's all very, very exciting. So go to the website, check it out, and take a look at this 2-minute trailer of our landmark DVD, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out.
Conspiracy theories. There are lots of them. They can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers, and then 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the documents from FEMA and Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures
all the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red gray crystals are very high temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
Well, indeed, screen this DVD, which is packed with 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence for this destruction, catastrophic, unprecedented destruction of all three towers. We've also included Eric Lawyer, who founded Firefighters for 911Truth and Unity, based on the model provided by architects and engineers. They have 200 firefighters on board calling for a new investigation. And they've looked extensively in this DVD at the National Fire Protection Association guidelines, which were ignored, flaunted by NIST. And of course, we have completed an 80-city tour of the United States with the screening of this, our latest film. So you can watch the 1-hour version on YouTube for free, actually. Just search on YouTube, Firefighters, Architects, Engineers. Eric Lawyer, 9/11. You can also, of course, watch the 1-hour version of Experts Speak Out on YouTube. Just Google, search on YouTube, Experts Speak Out. It comes right up. Well, today we've looked at an overview of World Trade Center 7. Next week, we go into greater detail with the look at the specific reports that came out of the American Society for Civil Engineers, FEMA, and NIST. NIST's computer simulation, their analysis of the fires, their initiation of collapse theory, which we critique and pull apart piece by piece. And look at the structural engineers who are speaking out. So join us for sure next week at this time, 1 p.m. Thursday, and Pacific time. And I know that we must have some questions from our listeners today, right, Andy?
Sure do. The first one asks you to elaborate on the damage that was sustained by World Trade Center 7 when the North Tower fell down.
Well, this is an interesting question because early on, we were told, before the final report came out by NIST, that a quarter of the facade, a huge portion of the facade was destroyed, a quarter of the depth on the south side of this building. Now, this building, each floor is an acre in size, so this is a massive hole that was claimed but never proven. So NIST withdrew that early hypothesis. In fact, they said the structural damage was not a significant factor in this building's collapse. What was? There was normal office fires, which caused the expansion of steel beams, pushing a girder off of its seat on a particular column, causing the internal failure of this building for 9 floors, which caused the collapse of the east penthouse first, and then that instability traveled inside the building, leaving the outside standing. In fact, There's a question about that too, isn't there, Andy?
Bear with me, Richard. I was getting the next question ready. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, I just noticed that because Andy forwards the questions to me as they come in from our listeners, and I just noticed that coincidentally that is the next question about the remaining portion.
Oh yeah, and this actually, okay, so this is the next question here about the outer shell coming down after allegedly the internal structure came down. And I remember when you were on C-SPAN, this question was posed to you too. So let's just lead into that next one. It says, can you address the claim from the official story that the outer shell of World Trade Center 7 remained standing while the internal structure fell?
Yeah, indeed. The NIST's whole theory is that you have the collapse of the inside of this structure 10 to 20 seconds before the overall structure comes down. Well, this theory is fraught with problems and completely contradicted by the evidence. You saw it yourself. When the building comes down, particularly in that one video from West Street, we saw the entire penthouse has collapsed a half a second and 6 seconds in the case of the East penthouse, but most of it in a half a second prior to the overall building coming down, indicating that those core columns, all 24 of them, must have collapsed simultaneously in order to allow the structure which is sitting on top of those columns to then come down all at once, a half a second prior to the overall building. So that completely contradicts their theory that this whole collapse was started from column 79, where they claim were massive fires, which we're going to be looking at next week. There, in fact, those fires had moved on. The photographic evidence shows that. But more importantly, had there been a complete or even partial interior collapse inside this building, we would have seen massive perimeter structural deformations from the columns and beams adjacent to the outside walls, because they would have been pulled in, because they're directly tied very, very strongly, robustly, as NIST likes to say, in this robustly designed building. We would have seen massive breakage of granite panels and windows, the crumpling of the building, which actually their own computer models do show, curiously enough, which we'll look at in depth next week. But we don't see that. We see this building dropping exactly like a controlled demolition, straight down uniformly, and most of the windows aren't even breaking until they go beyond the tops of the buildings that are surrounding them. So indeed, there's absolutely no evidence to back up NIST's theories, specifically their theory of internal collapse. And we'll go into that in much greater detail next week.
Okay, and now this is a very good question, because it lays out this fact that NIST's story implies that the structural engineers who designed World Trade Center 7 were essentially incompetent if random office fires can bring this building down in 7 seconds. Have these structural engineers who designed World Trade Center 7 tried to defend themselves from this accusation?
Well, they haven't had to. NIST did not directly say that they were incompetent. What they said was, we have an error in the way we design the structure for high-rise buildings with long span beams. We have not protected those long span beams. Now, again, next week we'll look into more detail, but the basic theory is that these fires were raging at the time around column 79 in the northeast corner of this building, causing these beams to expand. Well, we'll talk about why that couldn't have happened next week. But when they did expand, they push a girder off of its seat on this column 79. We'll talk about why that couldn't have happened next week. And then this caused the failure of floor 13 to fall on 12 and so on. We'll talk about why that couldn't have happened next week. And then the complete interior collapse vertically throughout the building around column 79. And then horizontally, we'll talk about why that could not have happened next week. So none of it makes any sense. And yes, I can see that the structural engineers could have been implied as being incompetent here under this theory, which is completely contradicted by the evidence. So I'm thinking that the structural engineers responsible for this building have not had to defend themselves because they're under the shadow of an overall catastrophic act of war in which 2 buildings were brought down, again, contradicted by the evidence, but the theory being that the Twin Towers were brought down by jet plane impacts and jet fuel started fires, that it is all so catastrophic and terrorizing to not only the American public, but building professionals as well, whom we have to hit over the head with a 2x4 to get them to even look at Building 7. And of course, once they do, they all go, man, that's a controlled demolition. We have to start with Building 7 because Building 7, it doesn't have associated with it the emotional trauma that the Twin Towers do, because A, most people are unfamiliar with Building 7. B, people didn't die in this building, according to the official story. And so it's new information to them. They're open-minded generally about it. Once they see it coming down, they have a direct frame of reference with which to compare in their minds. Yeah, I've seen that. That's like the old hotels in Las Vegas. That's a controlled demolition. Okay, would you call for a new investigation because NIST and our government says, and the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, say, just rubber stamped the NIST report, basically saying, yeah, this building came down due to normal office fires. And, you know, they got a reason that they put together, the expansion of these steel beams. And so it's semi-plausible until you actually dissect it, look at all the evidence. So I'm wrestling with this question about the implication of incompetence on the part of the structural engineer. I have not heard a defense from the structural engineer as to how they think this building came down. I have not seen or heard any public statements. If anybody has, please forward it to us at AE911Truth, right up on the top of our website. You can contact us, or I think it's the About Us section, where you can give us this kind of information if you're aware of any of these quotes. Are you personally aware, Andy, of this response to an implication of incompetence?
I am not aware of any, and certainly this is something that we should be beating more on in the movement to get justice on this, because the implications of this official story, again, is that if you thermally expanding beams in the corner of the building can bring down a steel frame high-rise in under 7 seconds. This has major implications, not just for building safety, but for the safety of firefighters that normally would be in a building like this fighting these very fightable fires. So this is something that we should be raising with building professionals and with the proper government agencies, both locally and on a federal level, to address this.
You're right. We are, in fact, writing an article about the lack of response on the part of the International Conference of Building Officials, who has taken the recommendations from NIST for changing our building codes. But while safety egress from high-rise buildings codes have been updated and fireproofing regulations have been upgraded, there have been no structural modifications to the code requiring, say, long span beams to be kept from expanding, and of course, shear studs would be a great example of that. A stronger design would be perhaps another example of that. Stronger fireproofing, specifically around longer span beams, none of which has been adopted. So that's sort of, if you think about it, It is a vindication of the structural engineers who have designed and continue to design hundreds of high-rise buildings similarly to Building 7. So perhaps they're all vulnerable if what NIST is saying is true, or perhaps they know that their buildings are safe as they have been designed and they have no intention of changing them, which serves also as a vindication of the structural engineers' work on this building, which NIST even claims was robustly designed.
Right, and as one of our dedicated volunteers often says, he's a former firefighter, is firefighters don't have a fire plan for dealing with this new reality that's been presented by NIST, again, with the firefighter safety issue, because these were very fightable fires, and a fire could break out in a high-rise just like this. And so what do you do now if this is actually a possibility that NIST wants to propose? So you either deal with that reality or you deal with the evidence showing it was a controlled demolition.
Right, because our firefighters are going up into skyscrapers. You hear about a skyscraper fire almost every month these days, particularly in the Middle East for some reason. But they go right up and they put them out. They don't worry about them coming down. They are not even aware, most of them, the firefighters who take their lives in their hands when they go into these buildings, they're not even aware of Building 7. It's been no revolution in the firefighting industry about, hey, how'd that building come down? We could have lost X number of 100 whatever firefighters in that building. But no, they were all told not to go into that building, that it was going to come down. Well, if it was going to come down due to whatever, then the firefighter, every firefighter should know about what they were told and what really happened and what the official story was. And then, of course, the evidence that we're presenting that was completely ignored, that most firefighters are also completely unaware of, the evidence for explosive demolition.
Okay, well, that is going to conclude today's webinar for the question and answer session and all the rest of it. So we want to invite you to come back next week at the same time, where we're going to be going into the next part of this webinar series. And certainly if you know people who are in the building trades industry or who have some kind of authority to move forward with this issue, please invite them to these webinars, show them the archive of this one, and of course show them the films that were advertised here during the webinar too, and get them to sign that petition if you can. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, Andy, and thanks everybody. Take care. 1 p.m. Thursday next week. Bye-bye.